Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We continue to discuss the Drama of Atheist Humanism by Henri de Lubac, Pearce, Henri de Lubac. We've taken Marx, which people know about him, and Feuerbach before Marx, not as much a household name. Nietzsche, of course, is. Now we're on Comte, who's, I think, pretty much unknown, and yet what he began, or at least he organized or collected around him, is the atmosphere that we're living in right now, it seems to me. So we're on the chapter Auguste Comte and Christianity, section 2, the monotheistic tradition, page 147. Transition, wow. So Joseph, take it away. You're our leader.
Well, I actually have something on that page 147, so perhaps I'll read that and comment upon it. We'll take it from there. But Comte talks about the social reorganization that followed the revolution of 1789. So obviously that's the French Revolution. But the point is that social organization must be done without theological intervention. And then his rationale for this is interesting. Comte has a ceaseless flow of sarcasm to lavish upon, quote, the reactionary doctrine that, in truly ridiculous fashion, ventures to recommend today as the only possible solution for the present intellectual anarchy, so fantastic and expedient as the social re-establishment of those same futile principles whose inevitable decrepitude was the original cause of that anarchy. So basically, what we're seeing there is that the French Revolution begins, of course, in barbarism and ends in a reign of terror that then turns into war and empire, and so this anarchy that's caused by atheistic revolution. That the last thing we need to correct that atheistic anarchy is a return to Christianity, basically, is what he's saying there. And it just shows. I mean, I heard someone tell me that the Nazis were the church, the Catholic Church was responsible for the Nazis because the Catholic Church is anti-Semitic and therefore the Nazis were anti-Semitic. I mean, so the point is you've got something which is basically avowedly anti-Christian that's rooted in a hatred of the church and a hatred of Christianity because it's Jewish, amongst other things, largely under the influence of anti-Christian philosophers like Nietzsche, and yet somehow or other it's still the Catholic Church's fault when these people that hate the church do things that are hateful. And Comte seems to be in that same sort of camp there.
Although, as we'll see, he wants to use the structure of the Catholic Church to kind of create his atheistic empire.
Well, and the reason why he blames the French Revolution on the church, and therefore the last thing we need is the church to be restored, is because he points out not only on page 148, Catholicism is rotten to the core. That's the top. Doomed to hypocrisy, nothing of real religious conviction in it, and so on. These are the things I pointed out on page 148. But it goes much deeper than that. When we start to see that this is called the monotheistic transition, the fact that he even thinks monotheism itself, on page 152, he calls it the Western malady. That monotheism itself is, this is 152, intermediate between the theological state and the metaphysical state. And then later on, he blames monotheism of religious fanaticism. And so he is for all of the blame of hypocrites and corrupt prelates and all of that, which people always are heaping scorn on the church for, and rightly so, in a way, what this man is doing is something actually on a diabolical level, that his attack is actually on God himself, that God revealed through the Jewish people and then through Christ to the church. He's actually attacking God himself. He's attacking monotheism itself.
Also, I think that because he is the kind of the father of positive socialism and positive, view of the world, in the sense of we don't have anything metaphysical, nothing transcendent, but it's just empirical stuff. I mean, he's empirically wrong here on this page, I believe, where he says, maybe 10 lines down, he calls monotheism never being anything more than a reduced and concentrated polytheism. His idea is that we started with polytheism, and then that became monotheism.
Yes.
Towards the bottom, he says, that is why monotheism is late in making its appearance. Well, I think Chesterton pretty much put the lie to that when he says that in all these polytheisms, there was always fate or some principle behind it. And the reason they became polytheisms is because nations would agglomerate, and you got your God and our God. We all believe somehow in one principle behind that, but we have to have different names because now we're different races or different ethnic groups or whatever. So I think Chesterton is right that monotheism comes before polytheism.
Yeah, I mean, even if you take Homer, for instance, from the Western tradition, polytheism, obviously, we're talking about the Greek gods. That is clear from the Iliad that Zeus actually says to all the other gods on Mount Olympus that if we were to have a tug of war competition and I was one end of the rope and all of you were on the other end of the rope, I would win. And none of the gods actually dispute with him over it. So the point is that really polytheism is that there's one God who's omnipotent, and there's all sorts of lesser spiritual deities underneath, right? So that's the reality of it, not that there are all these equal gods that are battling it out.
Well, all those other gods sprung from his head. So there's even in terms of the origination of these other deities, a starting point,
Right. The father of gods and men, right, exactly.
And so, so this is very curious why he is just so anti-monotheistic. On the page of top of 158, he says it encourages the most dangerous fanaticism, which is, as you just spelled out at the beginning of this episode here, Joseph, the French Revolution didn't lead to a dangerous fanaticism. Here this man, it's kind of puzzling how he could make monotheism the locus of all this extremism and fanaticism after just what France has been through.
Right, and when you look ahead, he can't have seen it, but then you look at the influence of positivism on the materialism of communism, and see the tens of millions of people killed in the 20th century as a consequence of his ideas. It really is astonishing that he can point the finger at monotheism or religion and say it encourages the most dangerous fanaticism. I mean, the fanaticism that good, solid Christian religion encourages is sanctity. The saints, right? Saints don't go out killing people. There's a big difference between the sort of fanaticism of a saint and the fanaticism of an ideological zealot. And the chasm is the difference between heaven and hell, quite frankly.
And then we find out that on 161, Comte did not like
161.
Yeah, Comte did not like to be called an atheist. So here you're thinking, okay, so he's setting up the God of Israel, the God of Christianity, the one God as being the locus of all the problems of mankind, and yet no, he doesn't want to be an atheist.
Because God becomes humanity, right? I mean, he wants to replace theism by we are. Ultimate principle.
He wants to replace God with man. Humanity is God, and he wants to also not even engage on the question of God, because that already is a sort of a distraction. Now you're still asking metaphysical questions. He wants to move. He wants to move beyond not just God, but even metaphysical questions about God, or is there a God? Or because yes,
exactly.
Well,
that's why he doesn't like atheism, because the conventional atheists are asking metaphysical questions, and he wants to cancel metaphysics. It's the philosophy of the cancel culture, all right?
Yes.
The only way we can defeat God is to make the question illegal.
Yes.
Ban the question. Right?
Exactly.
If anybody uses the word "why," you shoot them, and then we can get rid of God. That's essentially what he's saying.
Exactly.
So I want to point out to 158 that the new section title, Beyond Atheism, this is a characteristic of almost all, if not all, of de Lubac's books. Every chapter will be divided into 4 or 5 subsections. Each one has a particular leading idea here. And so in this one, section 3, Beyond Atheism, that's the whole point in here, saying we're not going to talk about it. Metaphysical questions, are meaningless. So let's get beyond this. So I'm not an atheist because I'm not going to talk about it.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
That's right.
I probably next thing I have is on page 164. If anybody wants to trump me, that's fine.
I'm on 166.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, well, this is again, this is Comte speaking here. This is that indented quote at the bottom of page 164, and I'll read for a few sentences if I may. Even in its intellectual aspect, atheism represents no more than an inadequate emancipation from God, since it tends to prolong the metaphysical state indefinitely by continually seeking new solutions of theoretical problems, instead of ruling out all accessible researches as inherently fruitless. In other words, all a waste of time. The true positive spirit consists above all in perpetually substituting the study of the invariable laws of phenomena for the study of their causes, properly so called, whether first or final, or to put it briefly, it seeks to ascertain how rather than why. So basically, why is now illicit and not to be talked about. It's a question that should not be asked. Any question begin with the word why needs to be basically cancelled and nullified. It's all about how. In other words, it's all about the study of causes. So it's all about the study of effects, not causes, right? And then he finishes here. Thus, confirmed atheists can be regarded as the most inconsistent of theologians, since they occupy themselves with the same questions, but reject the only suitable approach to them, which is not to talk about them.
Right. Right. And if you think this is going to be done benignly, think again, because in other words, we're not just going to ignore God and he'll go away. He starts out that way. First, we're just going to ignore God and he'll go away, because people will find that they can live without him. Then when he starts to realize, no, people can't live without religion, he substitutes the humanity religion for the previous religion, including providing a clergy and a liturgical calendar and sacraments and all of this, thinking, okay, we'll give the people what they want with this replacement religion. But by golly, that God thing just won't go away, and so now we're going to have to do.
It's Big Brother. Basically, you have to, you have to have something to fill the vacuum. And if you've got to get rid of a God, you replace him with Big Brother. And I love this phrase. It's not actually Comte, but according to the footnote, I know you said 166, Father. Just allow me to do the top of page 167, and then we'll back to you. But it follows on here. So right at the very top, the footnote says this sums up Comte very successfully, but it's not actually Comte. In positivism, God has gone unquestionably and forever. Now think about that's an ominous thing to say, right? God has gone unquestionably. Now I don't even question the fact that we have cancelled God forever. So you're cancelling the question, you're cancelling God, and how is that going to end anywhere except where it does end? In tyranny and mass murder.
That's right. And as we're going to see, when he starts, maybe I'm jumping too far ahead, but when he says that his club is going to be the new Jacobin club, I mean, if that doesn't raise your eyebrow, because we know the Jacobins, that was Robespierre. Those are the people who got the reign of terror rolling, right? Yep. And if he's saying to his fellow Frenchmen, we're going to start a new Jacobin club, you're thinking, holy cow, how can this not end in violence?
Bring back the guillotine, right? Father, I think you said 166, did you?
I did, but I want to comment what you brought up in 164 and 5 there. It always amazes me how someone can have such a great following when what he's saying is actually nonsense. Because to say we're going to eliminate the question why is to eliminate all of science, all of knowledge. It begins in wonder, in awe. Why is this, not just how, but the human mind seeks first causes. That's the function of the human mind. So we're going to cut that off. I mean, Lewis called it truncated thought, where he said that, the scientific method has made a lot of discoveries because they've asked a question about what is thought or what's the origin of things, but how do they work? But and Benedict was very strong on that too. The whole idea that the West criticized the East, Islam and so on, in that famous address at Regensburg in 2006. But he also criticized the West at no longer accepting that the human mind seeks transcendent reasons beyond the material order. Anyway,
reductionism to the level of mechanism is the denial of the transcendent. It's as simple as that, and that's exactly what positivism is. That there's nothing but mechanism. There's nothing but how, and that basically is a denial of the transcendent. Simple as that.
And then you get to 166, a new paragraph, quoting him, the great revolution of the West, of which Auguste Comte is a prophet, an artificer, does not fall into that trap. It goes beyond atheism to better liquidate theism.
Yes.
Okay, but then towards the bottom he says, everything is relative. Now that's obviously a stupid statement. Is that statement relative? Well, then what? I mean,
and also the point is that it's where positivism ends up, because it accepts the fact that it cannot answer the first questions. Therefore, the default situation is relativism. But the irony is that positivism is based upon empiricism, right? It's based on the only thing that's really true are things you can measure and know to be true. And then, because it cannot talk about things that are primal, it's reduced to saying, yes, but everything's ultimately relative, the relativist, as regards any question of why. So it's using, if you like, completely mechanistic, empirical means to come to a meaningless, relativistic end.
And we have to situate this at the beginning point, or one of its beginning points, in Descartes, whose beginning premise was all these metaphysical questions, and I think Comte is following in this line, we can't really know the answers to. This is all speculative. This is all what theologians and metaphysicians, they're all fighting over there with these abstractions and these concepts. Everything. We can't ever resolve these questions. We can't really know what the answers to these questions are with any certitude. Okay, so now Descartes is trying to solve the problem of what can I be certain, and that's what positivism ultimately. I'm positive about this statement. It's a synonym for certitude. Positivist. Okay, so what does Descartes do? He says, since I can't know these metaphysical things and these theological things, I'm going to limit myself to what I can know with certitude. And as it turns out, the only thing Descartes can be sure he knows are his own concepts, his own mathematical equations to which he can find the exact answer. And because that's where certitude lies with these concepts that I can, this plus this equals this, I can be certain of that. That's the only thing I can really know. What this does now is push beyond outside the mind all these other pursuits, philosophical, metaphysical, theological, that can't be reduced. You used the word reduction earlier, Joseph, can't be reduced to some formula of which I can be certain. And that is really kind of the beginning point of this intellectual development, if you want to call it that. And now Comte, in trying to, there's been all this anarchy of the revolution, right? And all of French society is in a shambles. And so what is he going to rebuild this on? He's not going to go back to these metaphysical arguments, and he wants to base it on something of which he can be certain, because that's the only firm foundation, is something of which I can be certain. So we're just going to take off the table things we can't be certain about and just talk about, well, how do things work? How does society work? How does man work? Which is why he's the father of sociology. He's going to turn even the study of man into an exact science. So we're going to find, the things that make men tick. And we know this for sure because now it's a science. And now society is going to be based on sociology.
But the irony, I agree with everything you said, but the irony is it's a reduction ad absurdum, because it begins with seeing is believing, right? And ends with, if I can't see it, it doesn't exist.
Right. Right.
Which is obviously nonsense, right? Because you obviously can't see everything. So just assume that things you can't see, therefore de facto do not exist, is a non sequitur, and it's nonsense.
And then he tries, before he makes his own church, the Church of Man, he tries to first subvert the Catholic Church. Like, if we could just replace the clergy with a bunch of sociologists, if we could just stop them from doing all this supernatural mumbo jumbo and get them down to the brass tacks of what makes society work and what makes man work, well, now the church would really be something. And I couldn't help thinking of Father Andrew Greeley, sociologist. I mean, there have been plenty of priests in our own day who actually have adopted the social sciences as their, now, just because you do a PhD in sociology doesn't make you a Comtean positivist, but the temptation is there to substitute the hard work of entering realms that we don't understand, mysteries we don't understand. We're only meant to faithfully transmit them and try to explain them as best we can, but never will fully, to substitute that which puts man in touch with God, and instead just put man in touch with himself.
Back to Descartes there. Of course, his famous expression, as he's trying to find the certainty, is, I think, therefore I am. A beautiful response was by the English philosopher Roger Scruton, who wrote a wonderful book, but he said, I drink, therefore I am. It's a book on wine tasting and so on. But, and kind of to get the structure here, this whole scientism is based on a principle that only that can be known with certitude as true, which can be empirically verified.
Right.
But that principle cannot be empirically verified. So
right.
It's performative contradiction is what it is.
Yes.
Yeah. By the way, if we can play with that word play on think and drink, by the way, at University of Mary, there's a bar on campus called Chesterton's. That's a great name for a bar, and they have a T-shirt and a beer glass, and on it says "Think responsibly."
Oh, that's great! It's great. It's great. But of course, if you turn that the other way, I am, therefore I think. Now you've put yourself back into questions of being, and that's precisely what we're not going to be permitted to think about. So, anyway.
All right, moving onward if we can. What's coming up next?
What's coming up next, Joseph? Maybe you need to.
Well, I was going to talk about the divine, the footnotes on page 167, but I think we can pass over that. I've got something on page 171.
Go ahead. So do I, but you start first.
Okay, so that new paragraph there. Once God has been shut out, his place must be taken by something else. If you do not want him to come back, a prolonged interregnum would be disastrous, for only what is replaced is destroyed. So here we have, an acceptance that a vacuum is an unnatural state, and that basically we will have a God. It's not the absence of God is something which is unnatural and impossible. So if you're absolutely intent on vanquishing God, you have to replace him with God, just a different God. You have to fill the vacuum with something else. And again, it gets Chesterton's phrase, that when we stop believing in God, we don't believe in nothing, we believe in anything. That the moment that you have that real absence of God, you're going to fill it with something else, which is going to be worse.
I underlined that also, but halfway down the paragraph there. As we have seen, it was precisely one of the weaknesses of atheism in its purely critical attitude, that is, it criticizes theism, that it left unsatisfied the needs that God had answered. But positivism, the most organic of all doctrines, quote from Comte, I think, for the first time supplies complete satisfaction to all the tendencies of the many-sided nature of man, unquote. Above all, it supplies an object for that urge to worship, which is at the heart of our nature. It concentrates, quote, our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions around humanity, the one true great being of which we are wittingly the necessary members, close quotes. So we're going to replace God with man.
Yep.
And is this something that's been tried, is still regnant among us? The World Economic Forum has as its kind of philosopher, Harari, I forget his first name. His book, is called Homo Deus. Man is God. He's not talking about the incarnation. He's talking about the substitution of God by man. Comteism to the core.
And again, Father, coming back to Chesterton, who's so good at all of this, of course, that man is something inhuman. In other words, it's something abstract. It's a concept. Man is not men, right? Humanity is not people. And when people worship humanity, they kill men. That's what happens, right? And we've seen it happen over again: French Revolution, Russian Revolution, the Nazis, etc. When we start worshiping whether humanity or the race, when we start making ourselves abstract concepts instead of real concrete persons, we kill each other. That's what happens.
It was chilling. It was chilling to me to see how far this replacement goes in Comte's psyche, if you will, where he echoes scripture on the top of 175. Humanity plays the same part in relation to the former God. In it, says Comte, we live and move and have our being.
Yeah. Which
is an echo of St. Paul, which, oddly enough, Comte reveres St. Paul. I mean, we'll get to that later, but
he's read a lot of St. Paul, and obviously that's an example of him stealing or borrowing from him. But
and I think also, though, before we, this is echoing St. Paul, but I think St. Paul was echoing something in the Greek.
That's right.
Before him, but now Comte seizes up, in both instances, St. Paul or the Greeks beforehand, they're talking about something that lies outside of man, that we exist in something of being, that's our existence is contingent on being, something before us, something bigger than us. Comte wants to just smash that into man simply exists in man.
Yeah.
He's his own beginning and end.
I want to go back to page 174. We think of humanity as the abstract concept that includes everybody, right? But it doesn't really include everybody in Comte's mind. New paragraph on that page. True, the humanity that Comte offers for our worship is not quite the same as Feuerbach's. This great being, this huge organism, is certainly formed of the beings which are ourselves. It certainly comprises individuals of all generations, but it does not retain them all within its midst. It is only the continuous whole of convergent beings. What are they? Mm-hmm. Criminals are excluded, even those among them who are called great men, the Neros, the Robespierres, the Bonapartes, all those who break the human harmony. Parasites, likewise, mere dung producers who transmit to their successors no equivalent for what they received from their predecessors. Only those are incorporated who have made themselves fit for assimilation. Unlebenswerte Leben, unworthwhile lives.
Lives were not worth living.
Yeah,
lives not worth living. Which was
this great God that we have that we're replacing the God of love with. We're going to exclude some people, the people we don't like.
That's right.
Right, and the thing is, the point is that this is the materialistic excommunication.
Yes.
All right. If you don't bend the knee before the ideology, you will be cancelled. Now, the Catholic Church excommunicates heretics, but for the most part, we can commit mortal sin, and we're not going to be killed. We're not going to be exterminated. We're not going to be hunted down. All right, we've made the choice to turn our back on God, and we live with that, possibly for eternity. But here is, if you do not actually bend the knee before the ideology, we will hound you down and kill you as parasites.
We're getting close to the end of our time allotment. Anything more on this chapter that we need to cover, or should we?
Well, I'd like to say one thing if I can, because because I think it sums things up on page 172. Then by all means we can wrap things up here pretty quickly. So at the top of the page 172, 5 lines down, he sees that this vision in Notre Dame de Paris, the great temple of the worst, the statue of humanity will have it as its pedestal, the altar of God, of the vanquished God who has become its footstool. Positivism is essentially a religion of humanity. So this is diabolical here. And then how does it play itself out? Bottom of the page, and then again, this is Comte's words, that the servants of humanity, as opposed to Christians, are the slaves of God. Okay, so you can be a servant of humanity, a servant of the party of the people, or you can be a Christian, a slave of God. But what happens, of course, is that servants kill the slaves. That's what happens, right? When Comte put into practice, the servants kill the slaves.
All right. We conclude our chapter on Auguste Comte and Christianity. We will take up the cudgels on the next chapter, Christianity and Catholicism. See you next session.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumbookclub.ignatius.com.